Hello and welcome to the AutoX Show. On the show today, we finally get our hands on MG's debut model for India, the Hector. We also get behind the wheel of the stunning Mercedes-AMG C43 Coupe and the Jaguar XF, which gets a new petrol engine. But first, here's the MG brand resurrected with their brand new SUV, the Hector. When I think of MG, I think of wind in the hair. I think of an era of post-war optimism and British sports cars like the MGTC, the MGA, and the MGB from the 1950s and the 1960s. But that was then. This is now. This is MG's present and future. This is the MG Hector, the car with which the MG brand is going to debut in the Indian market. But before we get any further, we have to address the elephant in the room. You see, the MG brand is now Chinese owned. MG is now owned by the SAIC group. Now that's not necessarily a problem, especially if you consider that China is the world's factory. SAIC is one of China's biggest automobile manufacturers and produces well over 5 million cars a year. So they know a thing or two about mass producing cars like this. This car is produced at MG's Halol plant in Gujarat, which was the erstwhile General Motors plant before they exited the Indian market. I can't stress enough how important the Hector is going to be for the fortunes of MG in India, as well as the Chinese automotive industry as it hopes to make inroads into the Indian market. Don't forget, India is poised to become the third largest car market in the world. So this car is very, very important. So I don't know about you, but I'm excited to get behind the wheel. Now before we get into the car and start driving, let's take a look at some of the styling cues, because this car from the front looks really imposing. Like a lot of the SUVs these days, it's got these daytime running lights on top, the headlights below, and the fog lights below that. It's got a big, massive, imposing grille and a huge MG badge right in the center. If you come around the side, you'll notice something a little interesting. It's got big, massive Internet Inside badging on the sides, 17-inch wheels, which actually look kind of small because the body is absolutely massive. This car is going to compete with the likes of the Jeep Compass and the Tata Harrier, but in terms of size, dimensions, and road presence, it looks far bigger, and actually, it looks pretty premium. From a build quality standpoint, it actually looks pretty good. The doors are heavy and it feels really solid. But if you look at something like these Internet Inside badges, they look a little flimsy. I'm not sure how that's going to last. Why it says Internet Inside is what we'll get to in a minute. Now on the bottom of the rear door, you can see big Morris Garage badging. So the MG brand wants you to make a connect with their roots, which date back to the 1920s and Morris Garage. Now if you come around the back, you'll see this huge tail light that extends all across the tailgate. The tailgate itself is very Audi-esque in its wraparound design. In fact, even the LED indicator lights have that sweeping effect like you'll find in your favorite Audi. In terms of build quality, I'm not sure the Germans would approve, however. It's got pretty massive shut lines, although they're quite even, and the body certainly feels very solid. Right, so we're finally in the cabin of the MG Hector, and this is what truly sets this car apart. I mean, where else are you going to find a screen that big south of a Volvo XC90? In fact, the entire layout looks really Volvo-esque. It's got this massive 10.5-inch touchscreen that's set vertically slap bang in the middle of the cabin, and it looks really modern and futuristic. And we were talking a minute ago about quality. The overall quality levels inside the cabin are actually really, really good. The other thing that strikes you about this cabin is the absolute acres of space. So it's good quality, it's got lots of space, and it's really laden with tech. This car has an Airtel SIM built into the car, and it gives it connectivity features that are always on. So it's got more tech than, say, a Mercedes S-Class in that sense. So it's telling me weather over there, It's got all kinds of apps that are built into the car, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, of course. If I scroll through the menu, I can access a set of files that you've stored into the car beforehand. And if I'm sitting here stationary, I can even turn this car, I can even turn it into my own personal home theater system. It's got an 8-speaker Infinity sound system. It's got a subwoofer, an amplifier. Sound quality is really good, and the resolution of this HD screen is actually really good as well. The only complaint, if I have one, is that if I've got the maps accessed on the screen, then it's got a full screen showing me just maps, and I can't do a split screen setup which will give me audio, HVAC controls, as well as the maps. If I want to adjust the air conditioning, I do have to do it via the touchscreen, although it's really easy because it's a massive touchscreen that has huge icons, so it's relatively easy to operate. There is a little bit of lag and it is a little fiddly, but that's always the case with all touchscreens. Ideally, in my mind, if there were a row of buttons below this, at least for the basic AC controls like the fan speed and temperature, that would be preferable. But as is, the touchscreen is, let's just say, it makes a real style statement and a technology statement the minute you get into this car. As someone was saying, if you get used to interior setup like this with a touchscreen like this, then going back to any other car with a more conventional setup will be really difficult. In front of me is another 7-inch TFT screen. In this case, the screen is fully digital, but I have 2 gauges with needles, one for the speedo and one for the tach. So it's a really nice integration of analog and digital. The information display in the center of the screen gives you all kinds of information, such as how the smart hybrid system in this car works, such as tire pressures, such as your fuel efficiency, and all the data that you would typically ask for in a car like this. What I'm holding in my hand is the smartphone that's connected to this vehicle. So if I turn it on, you've got a screen here which gives you all the data that you might want remotely from the vehicle, such as how much range you have left, such as where the car is located. I can obviously open and close the car remotely, even if I'm in another city, as long as the car and the phone both are connected. I can open the sunroof automatically, I can open the tailgate automatically, that as well is powered, and it's got a massive sunroof above me. So it's basically a glass roof that extends from end to end in this cabin, and it really gives it a feeling of space, and you really feel like you've moved upper class when you get into the cabin of this car. So the party piece of this MG is that screen and the connectivity features. So one more thing I need to show you before we can actually get going in the MG Hector, and that is the sheer volume of legroom that I have in the back seat. In fact, I can even cross my legs and sit if I want. The front seat is electronically adjustable. The rear seat has a lever here which allows me to adjust the backrest. And the big advantage that this car will have over its competitors is just the sheer volume of space in the back seat. Now the Hector comes with 2 engine options. One is a 1.5 litre petrol engine which produces 141 brake horsepower and 250 Nm of torque. The other engine is the very familiar FCA 2-litre diesel, which also does duty in the Tata Harrier and also the Jeep Compass. That in this trim produces 170 horsepower and 350 Nm. So that's the more powerful engine. That's the one I would prefer to be driving, but at the moment we're driving the petrol mild hybrid. So the petrol comes in 2 variants as well. One is with in regular trim and the other one is in hybrid trim with a manual transmission. There is a 6-speed dual clutch automatic available in the non-mild hybrid version. At the moment we're driving the hybrid with a manual. So as I said, the diesel will be a little bit more gutsy. It's an engine that we're very familiar with, and I'm told that MG has done a lot of work on that drivetrain to make it as refined as possible. So we're in the hills between Ooty and Coimbatore, and the first thing that I can tell you about the model that we're driving is that everything is really light and is really effortless. It feels like they've gone out of their way to ensure that comfort levels for passengers and the driver kept at a maximum. So it's quite silent, it's very refined. There is a little bit of an annoying whine that comes from the drivetrain, and it's pretty constant. I have a feeling it comes from the mild hybrid system. So for the mild hybrid system, there's a lithium-ion battery pack that lives under the front passenger seat. It's connected via a belt to an integrated starter generator, which runs the start-stop system, but it also, at low speed and low RPM, gives you a little bit of a torque boost. So essentially, it lives between the transmission and the engine. So you've got the crankshaft on one side, and you've got the input shaft of the gearbox on the other side, and this gives you a little bit of a boost in torque at low speed and at low RPM. Frankly, I haven't felt it kick in at all. I'm sure it's there, but I cannot tell when and if it does kick in. When you're slowing down and on the brakes, it regenerates itself, so it's not a plug-in. Very much like the Maruti mild hybrid system, this is something that lives very much in the background, but in the case of the Maruti system, it provides a great amount of efficiency. On this particular drive, we haven't really been able to gauge efficiency because we're in the hills. Right now we're heading from Ooty back to Coimbatore, so I can't tell you what the efficiency is like, but what I can tell you is that all the controls in this car have been designed to be as light as possible. It seems like the number one priority in the minds of the engineers when developing this car for the passengers and for the drivers was that of comfort. So the low speed ride is actually really good. If you're sitting in the back, it's very comfortable. Now, in terms of power delivery, that's when things start to go a little bit pear-shaped. 140 horsepower is just about enough to propel this car, but when you're going uphill, it does get really hesitant. When you're coming up to hairpins, you have to put the car in first gear and really step on it. In second gear, under 2000 RPM, it seems like it is completely dead. There is no grunt whatsoever. So it's completely flat. You have to wait till it gets to 2000 RPM, then the turbo kicks in and it propels you forward. But even the manner in which it propels you forward, there are sort of stages in the power delivery. It's not totally linear. If you really want to get stuck in and you want to drive this car as a driver's car, and you really start to push it, that's when things start to unravel somewhat. The power delivery, as I said, is not totally linear. There is quite a bit of roll. The steering is a little bit vague. The gear shifts are really light, but it doesn't give you that sense of being as thoroughly engineered as a German rival might be, for instance. So this particular engine, the Petrom mild hybrid, is best suited to city conditions. Yes, it's an SUV. Yes, it's got just short of 200 mm of ground clearance, and we did do a little bit of off-roading. The ground clearance is actually pretty good. The suspension articulation is not bad, and it's very comfortable, but it just doesn't have the grunt that you want when you're either in the hills like we are right now, or even when you're trying an overtake on the highway, for instance. In my opinion, the diesel, which is a very familiar powertrain and a really gutsy engine at 170 horsepower, would be my pick if I were to drive the car on a regular basis. With the amount of tech that you have in this car, all I need to do is say, "Hey MG,
I'm listening.
Set the temperature to 20 degrees.
Temperature is set to 20 degrees Celsius.
There you go. So when you're sitting in the back, all I need to do to adjust the temperature or to change perhaps an audio source is talk to the car. And in the class that is going to be operating, I think in terms of comfort, in terms of quality, in terms of space, in terms of features, in terms of connectivity, and we keep coming back to it, but that screen, that is going to win the hearts and minds of Indian customers. So if you want a driver's car, this isn't it. This is a car to waltz you along in comfort and wow you with its technology and its wizardry. It just doesn't have the integrity of the engineering focused towards the driving experience as much as I would like. But if I'm sitting at the back and I'm being driven along, then this car is absolutely fantastic. Or even if I'm a passenger on this side and I get a chance to play around with the screen and all the other gizmos on board. The other thing that this car is heralding is the paradigm shift that's taking place in the automotive industry at the moment. Previously or traditionally, you always had tech such as the tech that's in the car at the moment that would filter down from high-end cars and come down gradually, slowly, even over the course of decades into cars that were smaller and cheaper. Now you've got a car like this that comes in to a price point where we expect it to be somewhere short of 20 lakhs and then going up into the 20 lakh range. And it comes in with tech that doesn't exist in cars that cost 2 or 3 times as much. And that is a sign of the changing times in the automotive industry. And that is also a sign of the fact that the parent company of MG at the moment has access to that technology, and that is the strength that the Chinese bring to the table. The other strength that they bring to the table is the fact that China as a nation is focusing on electric mobility. They want leadership in electric mobility, and to that extent, MG is going to be introducing an all-electric car before the end of this year. They're also going to be bringing in 4 different car lines in the next 18 months. So they are very focused and they are very serious about the Indian market. They want to make a big, massive impact. And to that extent, this is their first trump card. Now don't go anywhere, because when we come back, Ravi gets behind the wheel of a beautiful 2-door Mercedes. Welcome back to the AutoX Show. Now when you think AMG, you immediately think fire-breathing monster. Now while this is still a monster, it's a slightly more approachable one. And also a rather pretty one as well.
AMG. When you see this badge next to a Mercedes-Benz insignia, you know it has been built with performance in mind. But with the 43 suffix comes a promise. A promise that it will deliver this performance in a more civilized, more accessible manner. Does the C43 AMG stay true to this promise? Well, there's only one way to find out. Mercedes had the previous C43 on sale in India too, but it was only available in sedan form. This is the first time the 3-pointed star has brought a C in coupe style. Of course, it does trade practicality that is typical of a C-Class in favor of a more desirable design. But it's a trade-off that some would happily make, at least for its outward form. We just love the way the swooping roofline blends into the boot. It looks absolutely stunning. The sharp shoulder line that continues onto the wide rear haunches is another one of our favorite design details. And then there are the obvious AMG bits, the edgy front bumper, the side skirts, the rear spoiler and the quad exhaust pipes. All make it stand out from the regular C as well as the full-blown C63. Interior of the C43 is all about technology and sportiness. There's this large screen in the center for the infotainment system, and it is Apple CarPlay and Android Auto compatible. Unlike other Mercs though, this one does miss out on a large screen for the instrument cluster. Driving the C43 at night is a tremendously stress-free affair. Full credit to the multi-beam LED headlamps that can project up to 640 meters. From Alcantara upholstery, sports seats, a flat bottom steering wheel and red contrast seat belts, the interior of the C43 is all about sportiness too. The only thing that feels out of place in the interior is this wooden finish on the center console. We feel some carbon fiber here or some matte silver accents would have looked a lot better, both of which you can tick in the options column. While for the most part ergonomics are sorted, we didn't quite like the rocker switches for the aircon as it requires you to look away from the road. A special mention must be made about the front seats here. They offer great comfort and do a good job of holding you snug into the seat. Being a 2-door coupe, space at the back is nothing to write home about. And getting in and out is almost like doing the toughest of yoga positions. But then, this car isn't about the rear seat experience anyway. As the 43 suffix rightly suggests, this one isn't a full-blown AMG. Unlike the 4-litre V8s from the 63 range, this C43 comes with a 3-litre V6 bi-turbo motor. At 385 horsepower, this one goes from standstill to 100 kmph in just about 4 seconds. The C43 is a properly quick car, but it is equally friendly too. Go hard on the accelerator and it will push you back into the seat and blitz forward. But it won't leave you flustered, and therein lies the beauty of the car. It makes going fast as easy as a walk in the park. Even with the eagerness of the motor to gain speed, you always feel in good control of the car. The 9-speed automatic transmission shifts quickly but can feel a bit jerky at times. When you use the pedals though, the gearbox does hold the rest for you, and you will find yourself doing that quite often given the sweet growl from the exhaust. For a car built with performance aspirations, you'd expect the C43 to attack twisties with enormous confidence. And in that regard, it doesn't disappoint. Aided by the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system, it offers good grip and feels extremely agile. Turn-ins are precise too. In fact, it is among the few Mercedes offerings that can flaunt a well-set-up steering wheel. While the handling is impressive, a real dilemma comes to light when you drive it on less than perfect roads. The stiffly sprung suspension, even in the comfort mode, made the ride quite rough, and that was a bit of a downer, especially given that it has the makings of a fun, everyday car. That being said, it is a compromise you willingly make when you buy the AMG badge. I'm loving the new direction Mercedes has taken with AMGs. They spotted the need for an accessible, sporty offering and capitalized on it with the 43 range. The C43 here does almost everything right. You don't quite need to hit the racetrack to enjoy it fully. You can enjoy it on some twisties like these too. It has the handling to aid the performance and features and technology that you'd expect from an AMG. In fact, the C43 works very well as a daily driver too. But as mesmerized as we are about the coupe styling, we miss the practicality of the old C43 sedan.
Now, here's Ravi with the Jaguar XF, which gets JLR's 2-liter Ingenium petrol motor. It's silky smooth and super responsive. You're not likely to miss the grunt of a diesel engine when you've got one of these under the bonnet.
While Jaguar Land Rover introduced the 2-liter Ingenium diesel a few years back, they only started introducing its petrol counterpart some time ago. We got the first taste of it in the F-Pace some time back, and we thought that the car finally got an engine that it deserved. That car, however, was in the 247 bhp tune. The XF that we have here today is in the 197 bhp tune. We spent some time behind the wheel of this car to find out if the engine is good enough for the XF. Since this car is all about the engine, let's get straight down to the business end of things. Hit the start button and the engine comes to life with an uncontrollable judder. Once it settles in though, the engine is reasonably quiet inside the cabin. But the real beauty of this engine though is in the way it behaves. Right from the word go, the engine pulls with an impressive ease. And it doesn't quite come as a surprise given that it makes its peak 320 Nm of torque from as low as 1500 RPM. And the 2-liter motor feels equally punchy as you climb up the revs. Take control in your hands with the pedals, and it doesn't shy away from holding on to the gears at high revs too. All of this really adds to the overall driving experience, especially since the chassis is capable of working wonders. The engine, however, complements the chassis so well that it's hard not to have fun with it. Speaking of which, the steering wheel weighs perfectly well and is amply communicative too. You can switch between the multiple driving modes of the car to alter the engine, transmission and steering response. For a car that handles so well, you'd expect the XF to be harsh, but that isn't quite the case. For the most part, the car maintains its poise over broken roads, and it is only over the larger potholes that it tends to display some uneasiness. But it isn't all smooth sailing for the XF. The throttle response feels a bit overeager, especially at slow speeds, so much so that it tends to jolt forward even at the slightest input on the A pedal. And it doesn't help that the 8-speed transmission feels a bit clunky at times. Everything else about the XF remains all too familiar, right from its exterior design to the cabin. Space inside the cabin isn't class-leading, but just good enough for comfort. The layout and the tech inside have started to show its age though, especially given what the rivals like BMW 5 Series, Mercedes-Benz E-Class and the Volvo S90 have on offer. The XF in this prestige trim gets a 10-inch infotainment system that finally comes with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Some features like a fully digital instrumentation, auto park and 4-zone climate control are only available in the top spec portfolio trim. The XF isn't a perfect car, but it's hard to find one anyway. The Jaguar has its limitations in terms of luxury, features and transmission, but what it loses there, it more than makes it up in terms of sheer driving pleasure. The XF is undoubtedly the most fun to drive car in its class. As far as the engine goes, it does a good job of complementing the dynamics of the car. In fact, it has got us thinking how much more fun can be had on the fully loaded 247 bhp version. I think it's time to call up the folks at Jaguar to request for the fully loaded 247 bhp trim.
Well, that's all the time we have for you today. Thank you for joining us. Remember to follow us on social media for your daily dose of all things automotive. And remember, it's chaos out there, so always buckle up and wear your helmets. We'll see you again next weekend on the AutoX Show.